The first helicopter shook the hospital windows so violently that dust fell from the ceiling like ash from a fire no one could see. Nurses froze mid-step. Doctors turned toward the sound with confusion turning rapidly into fear. And in the middle of the hallway, leaning slightly on her cane, stood a woman everyone had learned to overlook. They had told her to stay back. They had told her she was too slow, too fragile, too broken. But now, for United States Marine helicopters were descending onto the hospital grounds, and they were asking for someone named Angel 6. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unseen strength within people others underestimate, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be heard. The hospital in rural Virginia was not built for moments like this. It was small, understaffed, and quietly forgotten by the world. Most days, it carried the weight of routine illnesses and aging patients, not the thunder of military rotors shaking its foundation. Clara Whitmore stood in the corridor, her grip tightening around the worn wooden handle of her cane. Her limp had been with her for years, the result of an injury no one ever asked about anymore. To the others, she was just the limping nurse, the one assigned to lighter duties, the one people politely avoided when things got hectic. Clara had long stopped correcting them. She moved slower, yes. But she saw more. She noticed the things others rushed past, the trembling hands of a patient too afraid to speak, the subtle change in a heartbeat monitor, the silent suffering hiding behind brave smiles. Still, none of that mattered in a place where speed was valued more than depth. And now, as chaos erupted, she was once again told to step aside. A young doctor named Ryan Calloway rushed past her, his voice sharp with urgency as he waved her away. He didn't look at her directly, just gestured impatiently as if clearing an obstacle. Clara nodded silently, stepping back toward the wall. She was used to that. Outside, the helicopters landed one by one, their blades slicing the air with controlled violence. Armed Marines poured out, their movements precise and purposeful. This wasn't a routine transfer. This was something else entirely. Inside, panic spread. Nurses scrambled to prepare emergency bays. Administrators barked orders that no one fully understood. The atmosphere shifted from confusion to tension in seconds. Then the doors burst open. A group of Marines entered, their boots echoing heavily against the polished floors. At their center was a man in critical condition, strapped to a stretcher, surrounded by specialized equipment that didn't belong in a small-town hospital. His condition was dire, pale, barely conscious, his breathing shallow and uneven. But it wasn't just his condition that made the room fall silent. It was the way the Marines moved around him, with reverence, with urgency, with something almost sacred. One of them stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a command forged in steel. He wasn't shouting, but everyone heard him. They were looking for Angel 6. No one moved at first. Doctors exchanged confused glances. Nurses whispered to each other, unsure whether they had misheard. The hospital administrator stepped forward nervously, attempting to regain control of the situation, asking who they meant, what unit, what department. The Marines' eyes scanned the room, sharp and searching. Then they stopped. They landed on Clara. It was subtle at first. A shift in posture. A recognition that didn't belong in this setting. The Marine walked toward her slowly, deliberately, as if approaching something both familiar and deeply respected. Clara felt her heart begin to race. Her fingers tightened around her cane. For years, she had buried that name. For years, she had allowed the world to forget. Angel 6, the Marine said again, this time softer, almost certain. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Clara hesitated, the weight of her past pressing against her chest. She had built a life here, quiet and invisible. A life where no one expected anything extraordinary from her. But the helicopters outside, the man on the stretcher, the eyes of the Marine standing before her, they all pulled her back to a reality she could never fully escape. Slowly, she nodded. The reaction was immediate. The Marine straightened, his expression shifting from uncertainty to respect. He gave a brief, sharp nod, the kind reserved for someone of rank or honor. The other Marines followed suit, their attention now fully focused on her. And suddenly, the limping nurse was no longer invisible. Clara stepped forward, her limp more pronounced under the weight of every eye in the room. The hospital staff watched in stunned silence as she approached the stretcher. The man lying there was barely conscious, but his hand twitched as she came closer, as if recognizing something beyond sight. Clara studied him carefully, her mind shifting into a mode she hadn't used in years. The room faded. The noise disappeared. All that remained was the patient. She moved with a quiet precision, her hands steady despite the tension. She assessed his condition not just with clinical knowledge, but with an instinct honed in places far more dangerous than this hospital. Her eyes flickered across the equipment, noting inconsistencies, recognizing signs that others might miss. The injury wasn't ordinary. It was complex, layered, and dangerously unstable. The kind of injury she had seen before. The kind she had survived. Clara began giving instructions, her voice calm but firm. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority that no one questioned. Doctors who had dismissed her hours earlier now found themselves following her lead without hesitation. Something had shifted. Respect, long denied, was finally taking its place. As the team worked, fragments of Clara's past resurfaced in her mind, dusty deserts, the roar of distant explosions, the weight of lives depending on split-second decisions. She had once been more than a nurse. She had been a lifeline in the worst conditions imaginable. Angel 6 wasn't just a name. It was who she had been when everything was on the line. And now, once again, everything was. The procedure was intense, pushing the limits of the hospital's capabilities. But Clara adapted, improvising with what they had, guiding the team with quiet confidence. Every movement, every decision, carried the weight of experience earned in places no one else in that room had ever seen. Minutes felt like hours. Then finally, the patient stabilized. The monitors steadied. The tension eased. A collective breath was released. Clara stepped back, her body suddenly aware of its own exhaustion. Her hand trembled slightly as she leaned on her cane again, the adrenaline beginning to fade. The Marines watched her with something close to awe. One of them stepped forward, his voice low but filled with gratitude that words could barely contain. He didn't need to say much. The look in his eyes said everything. Clara nodded quietly. She didn't need recognition. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible either. As the helicopters prepared to leave, the hospital staff stood in silence, processing what they had just witnessed. The limping nurse they had overlooked had just done something none of them could have. And they knew it. Clara returned to her place in the hallway, her steps slow but steady. Nothing about her appearance had changed. But everything about how she was seen had. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stories like Clara's remind us that strength isn't always visible, and heroes don't always look the way we expect. And before this story ends, I have a small request. Comment below with the word respect if you believe every person deserves to be seen for who they truly are. Clara paused by the window, watching as the helicopters lifted into the sky, carrying with them a piece of her past she thought she had left behind. She didn't smile. But for the first time in a long while, she stood a little taller. Not because the world had changed. But because, finally, it had seen her.